Have now the Guinness World Record for most jobs of any human being one time. Now that you've got the A-list podcast, which we're going to talk about later, I think that's like 7 jobs for you.
It seems like it. And, every time we talk and I'm doing something different, you're like, why do you want another job? And I have cut back on a few, but I added this. So
I think you cut back on a total of 1 job. Lansing Community College Board of Trustee member. That's the only job I know that you've deleted.
I was at the same time I was on the Lansing Police Commission, and I resigned from both of those, almost identical, like the fall of 23. So what's that been, about a year and a half?
Okay. And is life a little bit better now that you've engaged in some addition by subtraction?
As you know, when you stop doing what would be public service work, obligations just fill in. You don't necessarily notice it. It seems like, though, I am working harder now than I ever have for a lot of reasons.
Gaps in the lives of type A personalities like you, I think me, those gaps are short-lived. Maybe a few days.
You mean like downtime?
Yeah, I mean, you're just looking for something else to do.
That is true. I think I'm not sure about type A. Maybe that's what this is, but I think a lot of it is for people who always want to feel like they need to be getting better at something. It's, you're not getting better sitting around. You're not getting better relaxing. You're not getting better, watching TV at the things that you want to be good at. So there's always that drive to find another hour in the day when you can do something to perfect your craft, whatever it is that you want to do.
That's 100% true about you based on the 30 years that I've known you. And I wonder if it comes from the fact that you're one of 10 kids, the eighth, right?
Yes.
We talked about, okay.
Yes.
The 8th out of 10 kids from a famous law firm family, Fred Abood and your mom, Pat Abood. I wonder if maybe that's why you're so driven. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if that's it. I mean, I think playing competitive sports, playing golf, I think as a young kid, my sister was great at teaching us games, and there was never anything we did that didn't have a score, that it didn't matter. There was always something. The older kids were always better than the younger. I was sort of at the bottom, 8th out of 10. So everything we did, was competitive. And then my younger brother and I, we weren't twins. We were about 18 months apart, but had all the same friends. Everything we did was competitive. So, Jerome was just naturally a great golfer. And I don't want to say I was in his shadow, but he was much better competitively, partly because of his age. He was younger than me, but he was also he hit the ball a mile, and he was strong, and he was a good putter, and he was very competitive, and he could win. And so you kind of have all these environments where competing and working hard and trying to get better that's what you did.
And I think Jerome is one of the siblings who's closest to you in age.
Jerome is 18 months younger than me, and we not only did we have all the same friends, we lived together in college, but often we wore the same clothes. I mean, when my dad went and bought clothes, it wasn't unusual for him to bring home the same windbreakers, the same corduroys, the same tennis shoes, the same golf shoes. We shared a golf bag when we first started playing. When we went in to get the clubs cut off, he did half of them and I did the other half. We'd stand there and hold the club, and they just cut it off where they thought was the natural breaking point. We had one bag, and we played out of that bag. Go out there, Hagen.
My research is that you, when you were a kid, teens, getting into your high school years, you were a hustler at the Lansing Country Club. You went out there and worked your butt off to not only caddy, right? You were a caddy, but then to get to play golf with the adults, right?
Well, that's certainly true, and the hustler may be the right word for it. Gambling was just a natural part of playing golf, and one of the first guys we
I didn't
played.
mean gambling. I mean you just were busting your butt all the time to
Yeah,
prove that you belonged.
Busting your butt, maybe. I mean, you're in the 1% at the Lansing Country Club, but gambling is part of it. It's such a natural equalizer. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're gambling, everybody's equal, right? It doesn't matter whether you're a junior or a senior. If when you step up on the tee, if you're giving the person 4 shots or they're giving you 2 shots, that's the only handicap. You're Andrew, that's Gary. You're playing to win. He's trying to take your money. You lose, you got to pay. Those are the rules. And, we learned that at an early age. When we first started playing with Jimmy Werblow, we played for the scorecard. That was a big deal. And we'd write the scorecard down, and whoever had the lowest score
Got the money.
got the scorecard. That's what you played for. I mean, it was honorable. When he graduated from high school, his mom pulled out all the scorecards that he had won. Sometimes it was a 4-hole match. Sometimes it was a 9-hole match. But, almost like the first time we teed it off, we were playing for something.
And people should not minimize or I guess the word is poo-poo because that's the only thing I can come up with. Golf. Golf is a tough game, and it's not for the faint of heart, and a lot of it is between your ears.
There can be a lot of failure in golf. I mean,
right.
You're playing, and it's not all success, and nobody that I know who's played it even at a very high level hasn't suffered from the golf gods. And Jerome and I played a lot of tournaments together. And I always said about Jerome and I, we've lost every single way possible. But we've had great moments. And so, you take the good and the bad with it.
Kind of like being a trial lawyer.
Exactly. There's almost a lot of analogies between the two.
So did you, when you were growing up, because Fred Abood was famous, I mean, at least in Lansing and mid-Michigan, did you feel pressure? Did you feel privileged? What would you often think about when you were contemplating in high school, what am I going to do with my life?
Well, I knew that he was a prominent lawyer, but when you're 8, and everybody knew somebody in my family. I knew your brother Jeff. I know your brother Joe. Your sisters went to, when you're 8 and everybody went to Barnes Avenue. We all went to Dwight Rich. We all went to Sexton.
Elementary school, Dwight Rich Middle
and
School.
Everybody also attended a Catholic school at one point or another, except for me. But when you go through that role, and you're sort of at the bottom, there's somebody, you're part of something, right? The Abood name was a prominent name, and I knew my dad was prominent lawyer because people would come up to me and say,
I know your dad.
Well, they would generally say, your dad is my dad's lawyer. That happened,
A lot.
A lot. Your dad is my dad's lawyer. And then, of course, there were cases that he had that he often would discuss at the dinner table or in the living room, and he'd talk about his cases. And, sometimes those would be in the paper.
Yeah, his ability to strategize is just amazing and uncanny. And is that kind of where you think you picked up the ability to be a really high-level strategic trial lawyer? Hearing your dad talk about how he would formulate strategy and closing arguments?
Well, I mean, certainly a great compliment coming from you, but I don't know. I mean, I you can think about it, and all my siblings would say the same thing, that we would, whether it was Idella Brown or Cheryl Crystal or any of the Cora Collins, and long before they had termed the phrase battered woman syndrome, he was arguing that it was self-defense because she had been beaten. And he would talk about the cases, and I think it was
excusing her criminal conduct because
right.
she was so victimized
There was
night
no
in and night
question,
out. Nothing else she could do.
No question she had pulled the trigger, right, or stabbed him. I think it was Idella Brown. And I can remember being in the living room. And listen, my dad loved me. But there was, 6 or 7 of us kids in the living room, and maybe some of my sister's friends. I was nothing. I was I was,
El Ocho.
8. I was
You were
7
El Ocho.
or 8 in pajamas, and I don't even know if my dad was listening. He probably wasn't talking to me, but I remember him talking about she was running, and he was chasing after him, and she turned, and he grabbed her, and she turned. She had run out of the kitchen. She didn't even realize she had the steak knife in her hand. And when he grabbed her, she turned and she put the knife into his chest. And, the prosecutor's theory was the angle of the knife meant it wasn't self-defense because
Premeditated.
it was, I think it was horizontal, not vertical. It was, and I remember him going through that example, that hypothetical, or not hypothetical, but that argument in the living room, and think, and you could listen to him, and he was a great storyteller. And no matter how many
Sure.
times you heard him talk about that, it was, you would start listening, and you just wanted to hear what the
You wanted
next,
to hear more.
Yes,
You wanted to hear more.
Yeah,
You couldn't get
absolutely.
enough. What, out of 10, I think 9 out of the 10 went to law school?
7.
7? Okay. And, your siblings who are lawyers are all great, but, you're the Abood Law Firm, right?
Well, that's also very complimentary. This is not an end in and of itself. It's a means to an end. And there were people that came before me, and I believe there'll be people that come after me. Jeffrey Lance Abood has done great in the
This is your cousin who
at Birmingham,
has your Birmingham office.
and he's done great and done great things with our name in the Birmingham office. Has a great reputation, but it's just you're sort of carrying a torch that you'll pass on to somebody else. But we still have people that come in and say, your Uncle Camille or your dad or Uncle Dick, they did this for my mom, or
Yeah, your dad's, I guess the first iteration was Abood, and Abood with the 3 brothers
right,
who were a generation
Right.
behind you.
right, and the lawyers that are here today, whether it's Carrie Korber or Mike Anderson or anyone, Dan Noble, we have Pat Abood, who's also here. Every single one of them, work with the same standard of excellence that, my dad started in 61.
What prompted you, though, to not only go to law school, but follow the path that you did? Is it something you feel like you sort of thought ahead of time, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to be the next generation of, Fred Abood? Or was it more of, let's just kind of see how it goes. I'm going to become a lawyer, get my degree, and then get the bar card and go from there?
It was a lot more of the latter. I wanted to go to Michigan undergrad. Jim Karras was the golf coach, and I went down and visited him. He had written me a letter, handwritten, said, I'm really impressed. Most recruits come with their mother or father. You didn't come with a parent. You drove down here, and, he took me around. He took me in, was it Ganem, the athletic director?
Canham.
Canham.
Don Canham.
Yeah, we walked into Don's office, and he said, this is your application. I have it right here. I'm going to put a check mark on it. That means you're an athlete. You did okay in high school, and I think that was, whether I did okay or not. But he said, I need you to take the SAT, and if you take the SAT and you get over 1,000 score, you're going to get in. So I actually studied for the SAT, and I got a score that was high enough, and I got admitted. And I wanted to go. My dad didn't want me to go. And, I mean, it was...
What?
It was the middle of the summer. I had not committed to Michigan State. It was July.
This is what, 84?
83, summer of 83. And, I was like, I really want to go there. And he was not having it. And
why not?
he just didn't think I was ready. It wasn't the money, because neither one of them were, I think Michigan State was, we were on terms there. I don't know if it ever cost more than $1,000. We would pick up checks for like $800, $900. Might have been $65 or $70 a credit hour back then. So it wasn't tremendously expensive. Michigan wasn't much more, but he just didn't think I was ready. He didn't want me to go and fail out. So
he didn't want you to go to Ann Arbor.
No, he was, I could have gone over his, but I finally, in late July, I said, screw it. I called up the dorm. I said, put me in a dorm. And I don't think they had orientation back then. I actually couldn't do my orientation until when I did my orientation. They just said, here's your dorm room. It was so close to school starting, just stay in it. And I was in Case Hall, and I signed up.
For those who don't know, Case Hall is where the athletes and the James Madison college students.
And I signed up for James Madison. I got in, and really that's sort of the beginning of thinking about going. Obviously I played golf, and, you play at a decently high level. You want to play on tour, and you think you can somehow, but I was never even close to that. I enjoyed playing golf, but I was never that kind of player. And then, through my first year, there were a lot of people that I was surrounded by that were going to go to law school, and they were just adamant that's what they were going to do.
So this is something I just learned for the first time, and I just want to touch base one more time on one follow-up, and that is, this is obviously going to Michigan. This is something you wanted to do, and I get it, but you didn't want to die on that hill with your dad. Why do you think that is?
I don't know why. I don't know. He didn't want me to go. Quite frankly, in hindsight, I wasn't ready. I don't know. I was not ready. I probably wouldn't have done very well. It was by far the best decision I ever made. Well, I was not ready to be alone. Even when I was at Michigan State, I realized we don't have to go to class. I can do my own thing. I'm going to walk. I can skip the 700 people in a natural resources class, and I can pass it. I can get a 2.5 in this class. I didn't really start studying until maybe the second or third semester.
When you decided maybe you wanted to go to law school and you needed to have a significant GPA.
No, that was not it. I had a class at James Madison, and we spent a whole, whatever it would have been, term or something, studying these. Basically, they were Amish, but Hutterites. And I just thought they were just so into it. I wrote this paper. It was really sarcastic. Was so, I'm
shocked.
And back then, when you wrote a paper, as you know,
chin on the floor.
Right.
Let me pick it up off the floor.
Back then, when you wrote a paper, you either hand wrote it out and then typed it, or you typed it. And of course, you'd have typos, and you didn't have, you had to use. You
didn't have Microsoft Word.
You had whiteout or whatever you did, or you erased it. Typing was a real skill. And so, I had my share of typos, but I turned it in, and then the prof wanted me to come see him. And
do you remember the professor's name?
Evans. Professor Evans.
Thank God you pulled that out.
yeah, so Professor Evans, I went in and saw him, and he wrote on my paper, "There's no place for sarcasm at James Madison." I said, well, it's funny because my dad had a million stories like this. A million stories where people would say, "You're never going to be a lawyer," or "You're never going to do this," or, "You can't go to college." I mean, and he said, and I went and sat there for an hour with him, and he was just beside himself. And I walked out, and I walked back to my dorm room, 5 North, and my roommate had the academic book. And
the academic book.
Talked about every major.
Okay.
And I went through the whole book. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. 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 Finally, I came to finance. I go, that's exactly what I want to do. That's what I want to study. And in order to get into the business school, you had to have a 2.5 in certain core classes. And
like finance,
accounting, econ, finance 391. There were a couple other courses, stats, computer science 115. So I had to get my classes. I had to get those minimum grades, and I got it. I got into the business school, and I said, "See you later" to James Madison, and still my studying was about average. I memean, the thing about Michigan State, I knew 2 weeks in whether I was getting an A or a 2.5 or whatever. I mean, you take that midterm or pre-term, they didn't call them quizzes, but you take a test almost 2 to 3 weeks in, and you
check-in.
You kind of knew what the grade you were going to get. It was like, oh God. So I studied for some classes, and some classes I got.
And you were probably not a partier, right? You were.
I mean, we lived in my senior year. We lived at 329 MAC, and we went to the bar almost every night. 329 MSC was a house my dad bought right next to St. John's Church.
Yeah.
And the year before that,
Catholic Church, St. John the Evangelist Student Center.
We went to the bar. We do the loop.
I know exactly the house you're talking about.
We'd do the loop, and we'd go, we'd walk down the street, and we'd go to not Harper's, but
Dooley's at the time, yeah.
And then we'd maybe walk over to Rick's, and then PT's, and then we'd finish at America's Cup, and then the Rib, and then, go home. And sometimes we drank. I was never a big drinker, but we'd do that loop every night. And the year before that, I lived at 1100 Michigan Avenue, and we would throw big parties, 6, 7 kegs. The cops would come because back then, they didn't have the term blind pig, but we would charge people to come.
Sure. You got to pay for the beer somehow.
And we would have noise violations.
Donations.
We'd have noise violations, and the cops would come. And I remember them coming one time, and the guy who was running the door had, a wad of cash, and he said it's $35 for the first violation and $50 for the second. I said, can we just pay you now for both? I mean, so we threw big parties. I've never been a big drinker.
No, you're not. You're a very tame, serious person.
But
not serious.
I was around people that drank.
Yeah.
But but I'll tell you. So my final year, I was working. I went to work at the office, my dad's office, and I was.
Was
working.
it still Abood and Abood, or was it Abood and Ream?
It was Abood and Ream.
Okay.
So that would have been like 87. I was kind of working there, and might have been working at Outer Limits. And I remember one Saturday, I was at the office, and Teresa, my sister, who was in law school, said, "Come on."
Older than you.
Older than me, 7 years maybe. Said, "Come on, let's go watch Dad. He's going to go talk at Cooley." And so it was Joe, Jeff, and I. And we sat there and I watched him, and the subject was the psychology of the courtroom. And you've heard Phil Jackson talk about the triangle defense, right?
Yeah. And Joe and Jeff are older brothers.
Also in law school. And he talked about the psychology of the courtroom and the concept of this triangulation. So you have the judge and the defendant and the jury, and you have the witness, which is a triangle generally, and you have the witness in the defense counsel and the jury, and you have the judge and the defense lawyer and the prosecutor is a triangle. And you have all these triangles, and he's talking about them. And I was just enthralled with it. And he started out, and he closed it, and he brought his closing. His closing brought the beginning to the end, and it was just like, oh, my God, that was amazing. It was an amazing, whatever it was, 2 or 3 hour. And we walked back, and I was like, I've never seen anybody do that, talk like that for 3 hours and then bring it all together and talk about his cases and interweave it all together. Now, for years I had ridden in the car with my dad, and he taught at Cooley, and he would record his classes, and we would listen to
So he
him.
would like dictate his lecture.
No, he would record his actual lecture.
Got it. And then he was playing it back in the car.
He would play it back, and we would listen, and he would tell the stories that we've heard a million times, and
Right.
and so he was trying to perfect himself as a professor, and so I knew that part. But then about that time, I figured I had another year of eligibility. I could go to Michigan State and get an MBA, or I could go to law school. And I know 100% I never even really talked to my dad about it, but I just thought I could, if I go get my law degree, I can practice law with my dad. He's not going to be around forever. This may be a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so, a bunch of my friends were taking the LSAT. I didn't study for it. I walked in and took it.
You didn't study for the LSAT?
I did not study for it. I read the questions. I had no idea how to answer some of those things.
And for the listener, the LSAT is a really difficult test.
It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
It is, yeah. It has no correlation
if Billy
to your...
is sitting next to Aaron, and Aaron is sitting across from Joe, and Joe is 2 seats from Sarah. I mean, those I had never seen questions like that.
Logic games is what it's called.
Yeah. I mean, I had no idea. And, I did average on the LSAT.
Without studying?
Without studying, I did average. I got into Wayne State, and I got into Cooley.
So why Cooley instead of Wayne State?
My dad said, "You're not going to Wayne State." I said,
Again,
he said,
another hill that you got to decide whether you're going to try to die on.
It was like, okay, and then I got into Cooley because it wasn't open enrollment, but it was basically open enrollment, and I did okay at Michigan State, but nothing. And I'm almost.
Did they give you any scholarship money or anything like that?
Not to start, but.
So this is 84, 85?
87, summer of 87.
Okay.
I remember I was working the summer of 87. I was working at Sparty's, Coney Island, which it was just the summer it first opened up, the one in Frandor. And I remember my dad, I had like one finance class and one stats class, and it was actually because I had done what I did. It was actually my last finance class was the first finance class that I should have taken, but I took them out of order. And when I took it, I was like, "Oh, this all makes sense now. No wonder they have this as the first class you're supposed to take." But anyway, I remember my dad just getting on me because Chris Barry-Amis, who was Sparty's dad, had run into my dad.
Owner of the Coney Island where you worked. Yeah.
Yeah, had run into my dad, and he he was telling him that I was working at Sparty's Coney Island,
And Sparty's is a famous Coney Island.
Yeah, well, Sparty,
it's a big hot spot.
Yeah, and Sparty.
If you know, you know.
Sparty was my brother Jeff's age, and I had grown up with him, and I had run into him, and we had played golf together, and he was a really good golfer, and his family lived on the country club, and his brothers and his sister, you know, there was just a family connection. And I had not mentioned to my dad that I was working there, and he was just like, it was just one of those Sundays where I think he was maybe annoyed that Chris Berriamis had come up to him and was telling him something about me that I hadn't told him about, and I didn't even think twice about it. And he was just like, "Are you going to graduate? And are you going to start law school?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to start law school." And
do you think he looked at you at this point in your life as maybe a less than earnest academic and maybe just that guy who wants to play golf and have fun?
No. I think he had a life experience of maybe other siblings who had said this is going to happen, and maybe they didn't come out. You know, maybe because.
You mean like your eighth kid's going to be a slacker?
No, I mean, you can take classes,
wrap them up in a bag with a brick and throw them into the
You can
Moore's,
think you're going to graduate, and you realize you need one more class or this or that, and he's just trying to plan for it, and those things can kind of happen. But for me, I actually got the book out. I said, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to graduate. I took the classes, and I knew I was going to graduate, and I had a stats class my last semester, and
oh God,
I thought I knew the material. I didn't do great, but I and I told my dad I was going to pass, and I did pass it, but man, it was just barely. But I finished school on a Thursday in August. Friday, I drove up north, and I played in something called the Kircher Cup, which is a golf tournament. I played Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Monday, we drove home. I stopped at my mom's house with a guy named Dave Brooks. My mom says, we have extra tickets to the Michigan State USC game, night game. He says, do you want to go?
Oh, my gosh, that game?
1987. Dave and I went. We went to the game. We went out afterwards because we still had the house at 329 MAC. We at the bar, and I did drink a lot that night. And the next morning I got up. I was probably still slightly intoxicated. I walked into Otto Stockmeyer's class at whatever time, 9:10, and I sat in the front row. I had a notepad, a blue blazer, khaki pants. And
the Masonic Temple is where that would have been, right?
I wrote on the yellow notepad, 1,095.
Which means?
1,095, which means 1,095 is 3 times 365. And I said, I've never really studied my whole life. I've been smart. I've gotten good grades and some. I said, for 3 years, I'm going to study. I'm going to work my hardest to get the best grades I can. And in 3 years, I'll be done. I'll never have to study again.
Boy, were you wrong.
1,095. I actually graduated in 7 semesters, so it wasn't 3 years, but I did study.
I know that mentality. This is it. I know the end. This is the beginning. We're going to do what we got to do. Right. Whatever discipline and sacrifice, you just got to do it.
He was, and Stockmeyer was a great professor. He believed in the old school call people.
Socratic method,
and almost every other professor that I was ever in front of called me on the first day. Even professors that didn't believe in the Socratic method called on me the first day.
Your first name starts with an A. Your last name starts with an A.
Well, my Fred Abood was a teacher there. My 3 siblings were in law school at the same time. They all thought it was funny. Ernie Phillips called me. He had me up for 40 minutes.
He was a sports law professor and torts law professor.
Glicksman called on me. He never called on anybody. I mean, Scott called on me. I mean, Koenig called on me. They all thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to get Fred Abood. I'm going to, whatever. And it was like.
And then go joke with your dad about how you stumbled and bumbled over trying to.
And I'll tell you,
give a brief about a case.
I was not prepared for that first day in Stockmeyer.
Because the Socratic method means you have to stand up and give an oral brief on one of the cases that was assigned.
And he did not call on me, and I was thankful. And I took a bunch of classes from Stockmeyer and always did.
Great professor.
Yeah, good, really good.
Yeah, one of my favorite, if not my favorite.
So that's sort of the story of what got me into law school.
You get out of law school, you start practicing law at Fred's firm.
Right.
And
I did do a stint with Justice Kavanaugh.
That's right. You were a clerk for Supreme Court Justice Thomas Kavanaugh. Michael Kavanaugh, sorry. I mean, that had to be really an opportunity for you to walk into that building and say, wow, this is where some really heady stuff goes on.
At the Michigan Supreme Court?
Yes.
I would say it was over my head. It was a little bit, it wasn't me. I wasn't very good at being a law clerk at that level. I didn't understand it. I'd probably be better at it now, although, but I learned a lot. It was almost like getting a master's in law, being able to read all the cases. You learn so many nuances in the law, and you read, you have to read, 30 or 40 commission reports and on every subject, and you're reading and the nuances and rules of procedure and the difference between a substantive law and a procedural law and the Constitution and so many different things. It was great as a sort of developing that, umbrella of knowledge. But as far as being a good law clerk, I didn't get why. We're the Supreme Court. We can just say the plaintiff wins.
Why not?
I mean,
why not?
Why do we have to write a 30-page, when we can do it in 5? But I sort of get it now much better. I wasn't great at it, but it was a tremendous experience, in large part because Justice Kavanaugh liked me.
And he was a great mind. Still is.
He's
still alive.
He liked me, and I would drive him. He became the Chief Justice, and I got to drive him, and I could see how he interacted with people, and he would talk to me on the road, and he would take me to play golf, and it was just like, oh, you're the Chief Justice, and yet you still treat everybody like this. You still drive down and go to a Hispanic law section meeting
and give a talk, and he was active in the Irish American the Society of Irish American Lawyers. You could walk into a bar on a Thursday night and see him having a beer.
Yeah, he was such a people's person. He got along with everybody.
People's lawyer. So now you're practicing law, and kind of the first decade for you is the 90s. The law is about to change in a big way, but you're at one of the premier law firms, your dad's firm, and just talk about that experience, and then deciding you're going to start the Abood Law Firm as kind of a reset by leaving your dad's firm.
Well, the one thing about practicing law with my dad is he let you practice law. I mean, listen.
He was not a micromanager.
He would offer criticism. I mean, not criticism, but critique maybe. I mean, he also built, you're so smart. You're way smarter than me. You're a great lawyer. You're way better than I ever was. I mean, he was so positive, but
you're pretty smart.
Well, I mean, he was a genius when it came to the application of the law. I mean, that's what experience is. I mean, a lot of cases, he wouldn't go look at the book, but he would say, "I think this is what the law is," and he wouldn't say it like that. There's no way they can do this. And a classic example was we represented Muhsin Muhammad,
right,
in a against Michigan State University.
Michigan State wide receiver, one of Coach Nick Saban's favorite stories to tell.
Great
is
story.
Mushin Muhammad,
He had gotten pulled over with a gun in his car, and Michigan State University had an administrative procedure in which they could kick you out of school or suspend you from school. And that procedure, he was not entitled to a lawyer but a student representative. And he got suspended from school, and we sued Michigan State University saying that violated his civil rights. And we had a hearing.
I believe I covered that story as a reporter.
We had a hearing on it. And, it all started with my dad saying, they can't do that. He's entitled to a lawyer. There's no way he can do it. And, we prepared the briefs, and we went up and had an evidentiary hearing, and I was the one that went up, and I wrote the brief, and, came back, and we got the ruling from the judge that day, and it was, it wasn't like he was, I'll first chair this. He allowed us to handle the cases, and his saying was,
you had to move fast on that case, right?
Yeah, because he was out of school.
Yeah. Every day you had to wait before you got before a judge was another day that kid was out of school.
Yeah.
So the case that I think probably did a lot to form some of your ability to relate to clients and people going through something was your dad's own case. And that's where I met you 30 years ago.
Right.
That was an amazing thing that I had the privilege to observe. Not that I was happy your dad had to go through what he had to go through.
I think I would have rather not met you and had my
in
dad.
that circumstance, yeah.
No,
your dad was charged with criminal sexual conduct in 96, right?
Yeah. Yep. It was the date of the offense was election night 96. I think that was a presidential election, if I'm not
Clinton won his second term.
Right. Clinton won his second term.
And I was working at Channel 10, and I met my mentor, Frank Reynolds, who was representing your dad, your mentor. And that was, I fell in love with trial law and doing that
He
work.
was, I sat in a lot of strategy decisions with Frank, and it was a good experience for me to work with Frank. I never appeared on the case.
Well, you kind of did.
But
we talk about it in a later episode that's going to come up.
Yeah. But
talk about the anxiety, though, man. I mean, I could just tell watching you walking into the courtroom that one day you went and got rid of superintendent control. I mean, you guys had to just go through so much.
Terrible. It was terrible. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But on the other side, and sort of getting an answer to your question, when people say you don't know what it's like, I can say I know
the
exactly.
hell I don't.
Right. Now, you can say that you don't need to go through that. Like, I think everything that you've been through and all the people that you've represented, whether it's a drunk driving or a criminal sexual conduct or a homicide, I mean, you've done it enough that you wear that emotion and you carry that burden with you. You kind of know what they're going through. But I mean, it's just a different deal, not only because, it's a family member, but he was, in many respects, the Abood Law Firm. I mean, and we looked up to him. And it was not only an emotional burden, but a financial one as well, because, we were probably getting, because we tracked every new call that we got, we were getting 300 to 500 new calls a month.
Wow.
I mean, it's no understatement to say we got every single call.
Sure. At least the first call was, hey, let's see if Fred Abood will represent us.
We got every single call. Like, we would get cases where, something would happen. There would be a car accident and an arrest, and, we would get a call from the victim. We would get a call from the defendant. We would get a call. I mean, we got all sideways. No, we can't represent you because we already, they would come into our office, and those were what I call the romantic era of the practice of law, whether it was at 117 East Allegan, which was the first office,
Downtown Lansing. Yep.
or at 603 South Washington. And it was just, for me, it was just the best time. Just the littlest things, like the way the phone would ring in our office on Allegan Street. If it was an internal call, it had a different cadence, right? As
Sure.
opposed to an external call. It's a little thing, but you get an internal call, and you could see it was your dad calling. When my dad, Fred Abood, called, and he would say, "Come and see me." There was no hello. There was no "come and see me," And you'd walk down, and you had that
Didn't want to waste time. Sells time for a
You'd
living.
go downstairs, and you'd walk down this long hallway, and he'd be sitting on a couch, and he could see you coming. And, you'd walk in, and he would maybe introduce you to a client, and you were going to talk. He was going to talk to the people, and it was just, you were going to learn about the case. Somebody was going to hire us, or we were going to send them on our way. But it was the whole experience of, meeting, and it was always exciting. It was always a
Right.
big deal. There was no such thing as, because back then you had big drug cases, you had homicide, you had, assault and battery, murder. All kinds of cases that we would get, big civil cases where people would come in. And then at 603, my dad had an office sort of in the front, and the way that office it was sort of a circle.
That was a huge building, right?
It was a big building, bigger building, but I would get up at the end of the day, and I would walk down the hallway to my brother Jeff's office, who was a lawyer at the time. And back then, you had pink slips. I don't know if you remember those, the phone slips, right? And that's how we distributed the phone calls. And Jeff would have a stack of them, and he would be going through these calls, boom, 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 and I would just sit there. It would be call after call, and while he's returning these calls, other people, finally he'd get done, and we'd walk down to Joe's office, who was, the next office down, and we'd sit there, and Joe would say, "What's going on?" And Joe would get up, and then we'd walk down to my dad's office, and he would be going through the phone calls, and we'd wait for him to be done. And sometimes he'd put the person on speakerphone. "I'm sitting here with my boys, and what do you need?" And what, blah, blah, blah. And it was just, and then maybe he would tell us what happened that day, or he would tell us a story, or he'd tell us about a case, or, and it was just like, and then we'd all walk out of the office together. It was definitely the greatest romantic era of the practice of law. And, it'll never be the same, really.
The salad days. And I just one more area on this topic before I go on to something else. But I remember finding out from the prosecutor, Stuart Dunnings, who replaced Don Martin, about dismissing your dad's case on the merits. And then I remember later going to work for Frank Reynolds, meeting his private investigator, Bruce Behrman, and finding out how that happened. And I just remember thinking, that's just incredibly good work. That's the grind. That's pushing a ton of dirt to get an ounce of gold. So talk about that case getting dismissed.
Well, we were hoping that there wasn't going to be a charge issued. And the election night of 96, Don Martin was a longstanding prosecutor, and the Democrats had put up Stuart Dunnings. And Stuart won that campaign, but I'm not sure you could call it a campaign.
Right.
A lot of it was, a confluence of variables that caused Don to lose.
Right.
I'm not sure Stuart did a ton of work. I remember Mike Otis saying, I was in court with him. We ran into Stuart when he was running, but before he had won the election. And Mike saying, "I'll write you a check, or what do you need for your campaign?" And Stuart never reached out to him, and never. It was just kind of a weird thing. But we know that Dr. Messenger was a big supporter of Stuart, and maybe
Another case we talk about later.
another Don Martin thing that, maybe he had just
Blew up in his face.
yeah.
A lot of things blew up in his face.
So we were hoping, and then sometime in December,
Before he's a lame duck, before he leaves office.
sometime in December, we get a call that they've issued the charge, and there's a hesitation about what he has to do, but it's obvious that he has to go surrender himself. And we talked the last time, or we talked about what it's like to get a verdict. That's a heart-dropping phone call,
Yeah, it's the opposite.
And as he's walking out the door, Channel 6 or Channel 10, I think it was Channel 6, are knocking on the front door. They know the warrant's been issued. Somebody called over
Right.
and tipped them off.
They know before you know.
They knew before we knew, and I'm on the, the only thing they videotape is me shutting the door on him. And
That's the worst.
He goes over and gets arraigned, and they interview the PR person for the LPD, Glasscock.
Sure. Lauren Glasscock, yeah.
Yeah. And he says, essentially, something along the lines of, there's a mountain of evidence against him. Same sort of term that was used against OJ. And I'll tell you, I'll never forget that moment. And then we go through the better part of what feels like a year, but I know it was at least 6 months before, turns out, what we knew all along, because my dad had taken us in early to his office and told us exactly what happened, exactly, what the allegations were, that he didn't do anything. We kept track of every single person that came into the office. And this, person who made
the accuser,
every single person that came into the office, their name was written down. The accuser came into the office the next day.
After she said it happened.
After she had said it happened. And so we knew, but when your fate is in the control of other people, that's when the great anxiety happens for people, right?
Yeah.
When your fate is not in your own hands but somebody else, can you trust that person to exercise sound judgment? Whether it was Stuart Downing's or the judge or the jury. So eventually we find out that the DNA doesn't match. And, it wasn't like the DNA doesn't match, which was no surprise to us, right? They had grabbed her sheets, bedding, and the DNA matched somebody else. And that wasn't a surprise to us, but when it's not in your control, you never know what the forensic lab is going to do. You never know what they were going to say. But the real difficult thing to understand is that they had that information, I believe, for 6 months before they told us.
And if I'm not mistaken, it also took Mr. Behrman finding that she had been with another guy.
Another guy who came forward through Bernie Finn. There was a hearing on it. And of course, that became, then the case became dead man walking, right? And that person who came forward, thank God, that was very helpful. He didn't have to do that, but that was a big deal. And yet the case still kind of hung out there, and we had a lot of meetings about what to do.
Damage to his reputation.
What to do about the DNA, what to do about, should we release it? And, Frank was under a tremendous amount of scrutiny by 7 lawyers, and Jim Heos, and was sitting in on the meetings. You name it. It was not an easy case for Frank. And eventually,
And we'll talk more about that later.
Eventually,
in a different episode.
Stewart, makes a phone call that he's going to dismiss the case, and it happened to be, I think, the day of or the day after my sister Ellen had a baby, and Stuart reached out to her the following day and congratulated her and gave her the news.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been just earth-shattering, like the weight of the world off
You
your
know,
shoulders.
I mean, it was, you can't take the fly out of the soup. It was
Right.
It was great news. It was something we knew. Nobody wanted to go through that anymore. It was something that you thought about, and sort of this is when I coined the term, it's the last thing you think about when you go to sleep. It was the first thing you thought about when you woke
wake
up. Yeah.
Jeez, oh, Pete's, man. What a story. I mean, that's not the reason why you started your own law firm, but invariably you did.
No. But at the same time, my dad had partners, and he had Bill Ream, who was whatever you call it, senior partner, a full partner, and then he had, I think they might have been in the bylaws, junior associates, and he had asked me, I was sort of, I guess, the business lawyer of the firm, to go around and talk to everybody and, try and figure out, what the next phase was for these lawyers and how everything was going to fit together.
They weren't holding their weight.
Well, they were good lawyers, and they wanted to be full partners. And, they had full practices. They generated to the extent that they had a docket, they did very well with the cases they had. Mike Otis and Dave Pashasnik were good lawyers within the firm. Mike was considered, if not the premier workers' comp lawyer,
Great
number
workers'
two.
comp lawyer, yeah. Great reputation.
Roger Rappaport may have been number one. Mike was number two. I've once joked, well, are you number two because everybody's tied for first? He didn't like that, and Dave Pashasnik was, had a big practice, a no-fault practice. But when I did that, I realized, I'm different than them. I'm young. I want to, I'm going to be around a long time. And do I want my future? Not necessarily with my dad. I knew that would always be safe. But do I want my future, my fate, my family, my 4 kids, my financial success under the control of Mike Otis and Dave Pashasnik? And my answer was no. I want it on my own.
And I remember when you opened up this building at 2460 Saginaw, that was a grind, brother.
Everything was a grind, but I left in my first day on my own was October 5th of 97. And I remember the day because I went golfing with with Jerome Abood and Dave Carter. We went up and played, I think, Egypt Valley. And we played golf, and I can't say that I never looked back. It's always been a grind. It's always been a grind. And my dad came and joined me in the summer of 90, maybe September of 98, along with my brothers and my siblings. We've been practicing law, and 28 years later, we're still.
And you've hired a lot of people who went on to do great things. You've gone on to do great things that we probably don't have time to really talk about. I'd love to talk about do we have time to talk about the Drew Peterson story?
We have,
Well, we should make the time. That was an amazing piece of work that you did. And a lot of it was because of the arguments that you formulated and I think successfully advanced on the evidentiary issues. One of them was the forfeiture by wrongdoing issue, because Drew, his wife was dead.
Great research.
And they wanted
Yep.
to put her statements in, claiming he killed her just so that she couldn't testify at his trial. Basically, am I that far off?
That's one of the exceptions to the confrontation clause. The dying declaration and the forfeiture by wrongdoing are the 2 exceptions. and they go back to the Magna Carta. But we get
You drove to Chicago every day
well
for like 2 months.
Yeah, that was a great experience. And
It was like 07 or 08 or something like that.
07 we got retained.
National news, another
national
international story because
all the
he was a
time.
cop and a bunch of his wives had disappeared or something.
Third wife, Kathleen Savio, died in a bathtub right around March 2nd. There was a
Why did you do that?
March 2nd weekend, and then they called it accident. And the fourth wife, Stacy Peterson, went missing in 07, and they exhumed Kathy Savio's body and got a pathologist to conclude that it was homicide. So you have that interesting dynamic, right?
Oh, fascinating.
And then while the case is uncharged, the legislature passes a law that allows 6 or 7 statements to come in under the forfeiture by wrongdoing. So ex post facto.
It's a big
Right?
deal. It's a big deal.
Right? I mean, it's a courtroom full of people and the media, which is, often a sideshow. I mean, again,
Sideshow is one modifier I would use, which starts with the letter S. But anyway, go on.
but, if working for Justice Kavanaugh was considered, like getting a master's of law in all areas of law, this was, like an obstacle course for, when you used to watch him on ABC Wild World of Sports, right? You're walking in,
The thrill of victory, the agony of defeat.
You're walking into a courtroom where, you got another state, another jurisdiction, another procedure. It's high stakes, right? And, you're got to challenge your mettle. And my dad used to say, if you want to be a lawyer, you got to have cases, right? And if you want to do homicides, you got to try homicide. You can't do murder cases or consider yourself an expert in murder cases and not have done murder cases, right? And quite frankly, not that I want to talk about the financial aspects, but you're not going to do homicide cases if you only take retained cases
and make money on them.
unless maybe you're Frank Reynolds in a different era. So how do you build that reputation of doing homicide cases unless you take homicide cases, right? You have to take the cases. And so, you have to take what comes in your door and you pray to God or whatever, loaves and the fishes.
You're going to keep the doors open and the lights on.
That you're going to be able to pay the bills. Somehow, you got to be able to pay the bills. But, if this is what you want to do, you got to take those cases.
Yeah, 100%.
And that was
But that was a big one, brother. to make that drive every day. That was your whole life
but it was
a long time.
Great learning experience, to be in a courtroom. Look at anytime you can be in a courtroom with a bunch of lawyers, right? All fighting, half of them fighting against you, and being able to work with them and work against them.
Right, you're talking about the state's attorneys.
The state's attorneys.
It was Cook County, right?
It was Will County. So it was Joliet.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, it was an amazing experience, really. I mean, there's just so many little anecdotal stories about things that happened that were just, you can't.
I remember, I hope we're not speaking out of school, but we did a focus group by kind of semi-virtually, and this was 18 years ago, before virtual appearances were a thing. Somehow we set that up.
We were preparing for our openings of the trial. We were getting very close to trial, but we did a mock trial. We had many people that showed up for it.
At Cooley, right? Didn't you do it at Cooley?
At Cooley, we did.
And then your co-counsel was in Chicago,
right?
And a couple of other people were in Chicago.
I think we did. I think he did a video, and we had it on DVD. That's what it was.
Right, and we all watched it.
Yeah, that's what it was. The thing that the one thing that.
That's where I first met your cousin, Jeffrey Lance.
Yeah, my cousin, my co-counsel, Joel Brodsky. So this is one story that, maybe you'll appreciate. One of the things they did is they issued search warrants. They took all of his guns. They took his car. They took his computer. They took his camera.
He had a lot of guns because he was a cop.
Yeah, they took all kinds of stuff. And then, so that was like right in the beginning, like 07. So, 6 weeks go by, 8 weeks go by. I'm not going to get into Joel Brodsky's motivation, but maybe he was wanting to bring some attention to the case. So he files a motion to return the evidence, return the property. And he researched it, and there were Fourth Amendment issues and Fifth Amendment issues that they took the property, and they can't do that. And we actually had it scheduled for a hearing. And I said, we need a forensic scientist who can testify that they can examine this stuff and give it back,
Right.
And he was like, well, do you think you could find somebody? And I was like, yeah, I'll call Ann Gordon.
And did you?
Yeah, so we call Ann Gordon, and we have the hearing set, and I say, okay, we're going to pick you up. We pick her up. It's a snowstorm. We drive down. I think
On 94 in a snowstorm.
Tim McCarthy is driving. He has a Range Rover, and we pick her up, and we drive down. We get to the courthouse in the morning. We have this hearing, like a argument. And the judge says, okay, I'll give you an evidentiary hearing this afternoon. Come back at 1 o'clock. I go, okay, great. So I'm thinking Joel's going to run the hearing. We go to lunch and he says, why don't you run the hearing? I'm like, what? What? Are you kidding me?
Because what people may not understand is if you're going to run an evidentiary hearing, you got to prep the witness, have the witness ready, do the examination.
Well,
do the cross,
yes,
get ready for arguments.
I didn't have any problem with any of that. It's in Illinois. You generally know the law, but you're talking about another state. I haven't looked at the rules of evidence. I haven't looked at the procedures. It's like, you want me to run it? So I was like, okay. I put her on the stand. I had known Ann well. She had testified in another case for me, Shamari Milton, and a homicide case that we had won.
Yeah, I remember that one, yeah.
So we put her on the stand, and she testified, and Ann had worked at the state police and had left because she had, it's public, and I don't think she did anything wrong, but the state police terminated her because she
used expired DNA reagent to test her husband's underwear.
Yes.
I'll say.
Yes. She used state resources to test her husband's underwear, which turned out, I think, to show that he might have had somebody else's DNA on his underwear. Or I think that's what it showed, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's when the state found out about it because she was going through a divorce, they let her go. So I put her up. She rings all the bells. I'm able to get her through. And the judge also said, you have 25 minutes.
Oh, my God.
Or something. It wasn't like you have 3 hours. He would put a time limit. So now, not only are you worried about everything else, but you got to cover everything. And then they do the cross, of course, which they're entitled to do. And they get into all the reasons why, she is tainted because of this and that, and what she did at the state police. And so on redirect, I go through and I impeach her and,
rehabilitate her.
I rehabilitate her. And
I think the first question was, were you correct Were you right?
Well, ultimately, what I closed with was, at the end, when you were done testing the underwear, did you give it back?
Oh, perfect.
And she said yes, and the judge agreed with us and ordered that, the camera, the cars, the computer, all that could be ghosted and given back. And he got it all back. And, one of the things that you learn is never stop being aggressive.
Right.
Joel was aggressive. I mean, I was like, I've never seen emotion like this. I mean, of course they get to keep the evidence. And he was like, it was great research. It was top notch, and we won, and we walked out of there, and I said, winning is great, but it's never as great as losing is bad.
Right.
And he said, yeah. I said, it's great to win, but had we lost, it would have been horrible. But this was great. That was a great first victory.
We got to talk about who's going to be on the podcast.
Okay. We got you on there,
Yep.
for sure.
I'll be on there a couple of times. You've got some athletes. You got you got a TV personality, Tim Stout. Right?
Tim Stout.
Who else?
Red Savage.
Hockey player for MSU.
Number one hockey team in the country, and hopefully been drafted by the Red Wings. We got Jeremy Fears, a friend of mine, and point guard for Michigan State, and who's gone through a little adversity in his life, yet coming back and leading, hopefully, Michigan State to a Big Ten title. We've got Ron DeLeon, longtime friend, and sort of a famous or most famous bus driver in the city of Lansing, who's won the top of the town many years in a row.
And an MMA promoter.
And an MMA promoter.
Retired
Probably
boxer.
the nicest guy I've known. Always gets away. When they say nice guys finish last, not Ron DeLeon. Right?
And a retired boxer.
Right.
And he's a really, really amazing person.
Right. I'm hoping to get some judges on here that have committed. Chief Justice Clement has indicated that she would come on the show. We're going to work with her, and hopefully we can get...
She's got a really good sense of humor that a lot of people may not appreciate.
Well, I mean, she does a really good job of making fun of me and keeping me in check. And she does it, in a good way, and always has credibility, and I appreciate that. And, I have such a high opinion of Chief Justice Michael Kavanaugh, of being a man of the people, and I didn't think anybody could ever replicate that, but she's about as close as I've
she
seen.
really is. Yeah, she's a very, very down-to-earth person.
Right.
Good
but
soul.
Still can operate a very high intellect, so I look forward to having her on, and I'm hoping we may have Dr. Joyce DeYoung, who's both been an adversary and an advocate, and
currently the dean of the College of Medicine,
right,
and was the forensic pathologist for, I think, Western Michigan University before she
Kalamazoo maybe area. But here in Ingham County, did a lot of big cases, and my understanding is she just helped in the D.C. crash identify all the bodies.
Sure.
So she's got a lot of stories. Some of them she was on
gruesome.
the other,
some of them a little morbid.
Other side of us, but some of them on the same side.
All right. Well, looking forward to watching you on your latest, we'll call it gig, your latest side hustle.
Right.
I know it's going to be fascinating. You've had an amazing career, and I can't wait to hear you talk about it with your guests.
Great job.
All right, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you.